Welcome to episode 16 of season 2 of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast, your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. Episode 16 kicks off with a discussion of the police response to the Uvalde shooting. Is it better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all? Rest in peace, Disinformation Governance Board. And to cap it off, a Better Call Saul episode 7 recap. Before we begin, thank you all for listening. I appreciate it. Hit like, hit subscribe, hit send to all your friends, family, colleagues, enemies. If you haven't yet, please write a review. And This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. If you like what you hear, please support the podcast. Off we go.
Act 1, Uvalde Shooting.
The Uvalde, Texas school shooting has brought up another topic that I have been reluctant to discuss on the podcast. I'm still trying to figure out how to communicate it in a way that's not so aggressive, it's not so in my ego, and it's not so condemning. It's just been difficult to do so because it addresses a stark reality about where we are in this country with the police, with the militarization of the police, and what the police are actually willing to do or are not willing to do in the face of violence. It seems logical that as you militarize the police, as you give them bigger, better weapons, as you give them better technology, as you give them the body armor, the training, the tactics, you will have a force that will be able to address any type of armed confrontation, and they'll be able to diffuse that confrontation very quickly. They can bring overwhelming firepower, they can bring top-notch technology, and they can bring military-style coordination, and they can diffuse any type of situation. It is the apex of the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Through the media, particularly television shows like Cops, you see tactical teams. You see police SWAT teams storming buildings with guns drawn, the body armor. They're kicking down doors. They're bringing down the bad guys. And there's been a very, very, in my mind, intentional, and this is where I need to check myself. I need to measure my tone and my judgment. In my mind, a very intentional obfuscation of what it means for a SWAT team to actually storm a house. What the actual threats are when the SWAT team is going to storm a house, kick down a door where they don't know what's on the other side of the door. The obfuscation is that they don't know what's on the other side of the door. The reality is, if the police are willing to kick down a door with guns drawn, they have an extremely high level of confidence that there's not going to be somebody in that place ready to shoot back at them. That there is not going to be an armed confrontation. Whenever you see video, whenever you see media, whenever you see reports of there being an armed suspect in any state, in any region, the first thing the police do is they basically cordon off that area. They surround the suspect and then they wait. Frankly, dear listener, that to me is counterintuitive with the entire foundation, with what we've been told as a public as to why the police need more money, better weapons, better technology, and broader opportunities to use lethal force. If you know that the police are only willing to kick down a door and come in screaming and shooting when they know the other person doesn't have a gun, why the hell are they even kicking down the door in the first place? What's the point? Why is this the tactic being employed? I grew up very conservative, a Republican. I have a lot of love and support for the police. It's the hardest job that there is. And the way that it pays, the way that you're treated, there is a reason, a very good reason why in cities all across America, they're hiring for police officers. No one wants to do that job. But on the other side of it, and I mean to use the word but intentionally, on the other side of it, there is no longer a community a social, a symbiotic or cooperative nature to the way police departments look at the communities they police. I believe that because we have so militarized the police, that they now have this technology and they have these weapons, they see everyone in the community as a suspect or an enemy. They are now in a mentality, in a vibration. There is an energy of contrast, us versus them. That is why the police can often be so combative in situations that don't require as much. And in my mind, if you have to kick down a door, come in screaming with body armor and with tactical assault weapons, the person on the other end of that door better well have a gun and be a threat to shoot themselves or other people. I do not subscribe to this mantra that you come in with overwhelming force in order to intimidate any type of suspect from potentially going and getting their gun, from potentially committing a violent act. It is all spurious. It is extremely poor logic. You are creating a situation whereby the violence could escalate because you've escalated the violence. Do you need to kick down a door to go and arrest somebody who's got outstanding warrants and may have marijuana in their place? Do you need to be the one who escalates the violence in a way where you now become the enemy of the community? There are police departments who, knowing that there's a suspect in a house, in an apartment, will just sit on it and wait for them to come out and arrest them when they're vulnerable. It's an analogy I've used before on this podcast. When you are a hammer, you see the world as a bunch of nails. You give the police the authority to use lethal force. You give them the weapons. They will find opportunities to exercise this power, even where they don't exist. It is a vicious cycle that the police officers see many of the people that they police not as members of the community, but as enemies. And believe me, once you see people that way, they will see you as the enemy as well. And that brings me to Uvalde. You get these reports about how the gunman, once he approached the campus, exchanged fire with whether it be police officers or some kind of school security guard. And then the true story comes out, that this kid basically gets to walk into the school when there are armed officers waiting outside of the school and start shooting the place up. And you have parents screaming, why aren't they going in? You have parents who go to the media and say, I was screaming at the police officer, give me your vest and your gun, I'll go in. The most problematic video that I saw was the parents screaming at the police officers to do something, to go in, and one parent being detained by those very officers for threatening to run into the school to save their child. The exercise, the use of force, being used against a parent screaming, please save my child, while hearing gunshots in the background. I can't stress this enough, dear listener. If the police are going to kick in a door at all under any circumstance and raise a weapon and scream and have body armor on, the person on the other side of the door damn well better be an actual violent threat. We see time and time again when the police know that the suspect is an actual violent threat, they do not go in. They do not look to immediately diffuse the situation with sharp, tactical, aggressive action. They wait. They wait and see. The reality being, they're waiting for instructions. They're waiting for orders. I personally cannot imagine what it would be like to be in a situation where you hear the shots going off and your call to duty is to charge towards that, is to charge into that at risk of your own life. That's the job you took, though. That's the job. This story, as soon as this story came out, it didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense that this kid could go into this school with officers so close, with rounds being exchanged, and yet have the time to start shooting children and shooting teachers. Think about this. Think about any movie that you've ever seen. Think about any television show that you've ever seen. Think about the real-world situations that you've been exposed to. When an officer is exchanging gunfire with a suspect, it's an exchange of gunfire. The suspect doesn't have time to turn around and focus his fire on third parties, on people who are trying to protect themselves, who are hiding. Just Look at it in your mind. You're shooting at somebody who's shooting at you, and then you turn and start shooting at people who are lying prone on the ground, who are hiding under tables. It would give the person shooting at you ample opportunity to take aim and kill you. So the story as it was initially presented did not sit right to me. It didn't make sense. How can this kid go and exchange gunfire with officers in order to force his way into the school and then have time to shoot the place up, to shoot children, to shoot teachers? He would be in fear of having to exchange additional gunfire with the people who were pursuing him. The reality being, it was not a pursuit. There was no pursuit. So much so that you had parents fearing for their children's lives, saying to officers presenting on the scene, "Why aren't you rushing in there? Get your ass in there. I want to see cops style, doors getting kicked down, rifle rounds being exchanged, suspect subdued and or killed." By way of the timeline as it has been presented to us, that did not occur. This tactical response did not occur for close to 90 minutes. And that tactical response was from a team that was off duty and that was not responding to that scene. It was a tactical border patrol unit. Think about it. How long would that kid have been able to stay in that school had not off-duty border patrol tactical officers organized themselves and in a coordinated fashion gone in there and taken him out? When you talk about these types of shootings and you try to respond with security measures, the only security measure that's going to matter is action. If in the moment there is paralysis, these shootings are going to continue ad infinitum. There's no way, even with a gun ban, that you're going to be able to prevent these types of shootings because people are going to be able to get guns. You ban guns in this country and you would create a black market unlike any other that's existed in the history of the world. It's so sad that there was just another shooting in Buffalo not a week or two ago, and you get the pundits that come out, and there's the experts, and there's conventional wisdom. When you hear the shots fired, first thing you do is run, second thing you do is hide or get down, third thing you do is take action or try to charge a shooter. I think that conventional wisdom now has to be thrown out the door. It has to be completely disregarded because we don't have, and it has been proven over the course of the last 10 years, we don't have the type of response from law enforcement that we've been led to believe we've been building. Why have we been giving you all this money? Why do you have such high-powered weaponry? Why do you have such advanced tactical equipment? What is the point of all of this? If it is not for in a moment when there is a school shooter, for people to charge at that shooter and to incapacitate him or kill him. This is the number one job. This is the reason why you've gotten all of those assets and resources. And the police, at least in my mind, and this is where the judgment comes in, and I'm trying to be as impartial as possible, but just by way of the record and just by way of the facts, over and over again, the police present at a shooting and they wait. This is what they do. They've been doing this for years. Anytime that there's a shooter, they surround, they cordon off to make sure that there is no way the shooter's going to be able to escape, and then they wait. It doesn't work. If the only time that you're willing to charge a door is when you know the person on the other side of the door doesn't have a gun or is not going to resist you, that is a pussy way to approach policing, to approach law enforcement. You hear all this nonsense now about bullying, and it's all over. Anything that anyone critically says about anyone or anything is now qualified as bullying. Look, real bullying is when you have all of the advantage in the world. You have the force and power of the state. You have highly advanced technical weapons. You have a force multiplier by way of numbers. You are always going to outnumber who you're facing. And yet, you use the most heavy-handed tactics against people that you know have no opportunity to resist you. In the face of the type of resistance that you are bringing to bear, what do? You stand back and you wait? It doesn't make sense to me, dear listener. It just doesn't make sense to me. There are numerous societal ills. There are numerous problems here that can be addressed, whether or not it's isolation of young people, what's going on in public schools, the availability of guns, what have you. One thing that we need to discuss is whether or not having a police force that has been militarized to the degree that it has, that no longer feels that it is a community member or that it is helping police the community for the benefit of contemporaries, of people that you call your countrymen. And the failure in the moment of seeing the type of escalated violence that you have in a school shooting, and there being a 1970s, 1980s style conventional response of, let's surround the place and wait. That, to me, dear listener, needs to be addressed. Yes, we need to address everything else, and yes, we need to support police, but we also need to demand more of police. If you want all the money and you want all of the assets, then you're going to have to, in the face of this type of danger, charge in like you would if you were on an episode of Cops.
Act 2. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all.
We've all heard it, haven't we, dear listener? The old axiom, 'tis better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all. Channeling 28-year-old Patrick, that is the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my entire life. What kind of fucktard is going to pass that off as wisdom? Thank you, Professor Idiom from Planet Jackass. Take your vacuous nonsense to the O Network or Hallmark. That guy ruined a lot of relationships. The strange thing about love, about feeling love, about even feeling affection, strong feelings of affinity, is that it's not anything like what you get in movies or television, particularly on your bachelor or bachelorettes. There's a lot of work involved. There's a lot of personal self-assessment involved. And in particular, there's a lot of vulnerability involved. As I mentioned in a prior podcast segment, I am now dating someone. And as of the recording of this segment, for episode 16, I am no longer dating someone. We have mutually and amicably parted. When reflecting on the feelings that one has after coming out of a relationship, there are so many what we would qualify as negative emotions that come up. The feeling of rejection and sorrow, sadness, feelings of unworthiness. I've made a point on this very podcast, in this season of the podcast, to state that I'm on a different spiritual path, that I'm going through a different journey. But part of that old Patrick, that 28-year-old, he lingers. And I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing. It's the guy that says, hey, quit being a bitch. Look at this from the flip side. You really want to embrace everything that you say you embrace? Think greater than your environment. Look at things from below, not above. See, your ego, even though it routinely sounds like the biggest dick that you've ever met in your life, can often give you the proper kick in the ass to get you realigned to see what is often ugly is actually beautiful. And then it came through me. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never have loved at all. It's better to have gotten into relationships where you have these extremely strong feelings, where you have this bond with the other person, where you have this vulnerability with the other person. As much as we try to make it about the other person or about the word love or what that concept means in general, it's also an exercise into our own growth and development. Vulnerability necessitates honesty, and honesty necessitates what? Addressing, if not confronting, the shadow part of you, the part of you, these selves that you have that you're not that proud of, that you are in fact ashamed of. Can you be vulnerable enough with someone else to expose those parts of you, to admit that you're not necessarily that proud, that these are parts of you, and then ask the other person to work with you to get past it, to put it down, to put it away, to grow from it? Having the opportunity to do that, to engage in that process, is a blessing. It is a blessing to find someone that you're willing to do that with, even when you're uncertain about the outcome. And naturally, given that nothing in life is certain, love is a dangerous prospect. It's a dangerous proposition. You don't know how it's going to turn out, and you're naturally, logically inclined to be guarded. Yet you can't ever really be successful in love and affection if you always remain guarded, if you always remain protective of yourself. So your ego has to take a step back. You have to be able to measure the temper that is your ego, that reactionary asshole, constantly stepping up to warn you about the dangers. And the real you, your higher self, has to tell your ego, hey, it's okay. I've got this. I had that opportunity with the woman that I was dating, and it was fantastic. And it did not work out. And that's painful. That's not something I'm happy about. Yet what has come through me is that it has all been a blessing. It is better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all. I have grown infinitely in the last 4 or 5 months. This woman was an excellent communicator, and an excellent communicator knowing when to talk, when not to talk, knowing what to say and not what to say, knowing when to be stern, knowing when to be meek. In many ways, I'm spoiled now. I can't go back. I can't go back to rubbing 2 sticks together to start a fire. Baby, I've seen the effectiveness of a flamethrower, and that's what I want. So in wrestling, in the aftermath of this relationship ending, I feel a lot of joy and I feel a lot of optimism. I don't know how and I don't know why, but this was exactly what I needed. This relationship propelled me to level up. Have I matured well enough that standing in front of a television set with an athletic team that I root for, I'm going to be measured in my response to that team shitting the bed on national television? No. I haven't leveled up that far. Can I be honest with a woman and expect the same? Yes, I can. Will I expect vulnerability from a woman before I'm ready to give any kind of affection, affinity, love to her? Yes, because I'm ready to be vulnerable in my own right. I see this as an invaluable part of my journey, an invaluable lesson, and I am not done with the course curriculum. I'm going to take the next course. I'm going to level up from algebra to trigonometry to calculus. I'm not despondent over the end of this part of my journey. I'm excited about the beginning of the next chapter.
Act 3. RIP Disinformation Governance Board.
RIP Disinformation Governance Board. That didn't take long. As you may recall from an earlier segment, dear listener, the Department of Homeland Security decided to open up a Ministry of Truth, as it was nicknamed, and let's be clear, it was a Ministry of Propaganda that the administration, the White House, was going to use to discredit what it called fake news, but in reality, to simply discredit political opponents, stories critical to the White House, to the Democratic Party. I comment on this only to juxtapose it to a story that came out this week about Hillary Clinton actually approving the dossier that was provided to the FBI after she had lost in the election to Donald Trump. This smoking gun, if you will, that demonstrated that the Trump administration or Donald Trump himself had ties to Russian banks and Russian oligarchs or what have you. A story that gave rise to the Mueller investigation, the impeachment of a president, a story that we now know to be complete and total bullshit. Over the course of the last 10 years, the last 2 presidential elections have been questioned by one of the candidates that lost. That's not a narrative that you hear in the news media very often, but Hillary Clinton is not given the proper credit that she deserves for questioning the outcome of the election that she had with Donald Trump, and for questioning it with suspect, if not outright bullshit information. We laughed at the legal cases that Donald Trump filed trying to contest the election results in a number of states, and rightfully so. The information contained in those pleadings was nonsensical at worst, and at best, far-fetched, a logical stretch. When we see all this strife in the country, and there are so many different types of people that are questioning the government, questioning election results, questioning politicians, look at the last two presidential candidates that lost the election. Both of them contested the results, but could not do so in any credible way, in any court of law. And you have millions of Americans in a tribal, partisan way siding with one candidate or the other. The media, for its part, did an excellent job discrediting the claims of Donald Trump as to whether or not the election was rigged, yet has done a terrible job not only discrediting these claims that were made by Hillary Clinton and her campaign and campaign operatives. The media has done a terrible job at excoriating itself. The government has done a terrible job at excoriating itself. It is complete and total folly to think in the midst of this type of partisanship, in the midst of this type of biased media coverage, that you could have not only an agency, but a government agency that was charged with disinformation governance, with identifying what is fake news, what is being introduced, if you will, to the American public as news, but it's just propaganda. The mainstream media itself is fake news, is propaganda. As much as I want to sit here and wag my finger to cast aspersions, as we've discussed on this very podcast, it's all about the money. It's all about eyeballs. It's all about attention. Promoting Hillary's bullshit theory, it drew eyeballs. Discrediting, debunking Trump's bullshit theory, it brought eyeballs. I've made this analogy to a number of different types of industries. The media is part of it. The media is like any publicly traded company. They are looking for the next big thing to meet very short-term demands, very short-term goals. News actors and news actresses, their producers, these people are looking for ratings and ratings alone. They use journalism as a shield to simply cover up their fuck-ups. In that environment, the government cannot come in and be the arbiter of what's right and what's wrong. Particularly when you appoint nothing more than a cartoon character as its head, one that has subscribed to many of the bullshit theories that were promulgated by one partisan side. This Nina Jankowicz had made a number of different tweets. Again, I have to reference the Twitter. I have to say tweets. Made a number of tweets specific to the 2016 election and how Hillary had gotten robbed, how Trump was a Russian asset. If you can't identify disinformation, how are you going to be put in charge of an organization empowered to identify it, to make it public, and to then discredit it? The Biden administration has made few adept decisions, made them quickly and made them astutely. Let's give credit where credit is due. Getting rid of the Disinformation Governance Board? Hell, given Biden's track record, that might be the largest wing of his presidential library built in the next 15 years.
Act 4, Better Call Saul Episode 7 Recap.
I don't have the opportunity to gush about things that often. I did have the opportunity with the 40th anniversary re-release of the Moving Pictures album to gush about music again. There's rarely a band, there's rarely anything new that comes out that has me so interested, that I'm so impressed by, that I have a chance to get that creamy gushery that you seem to have all over popular culture now with a 24-hour, 48-hour flight of fancy. I too, dear listener, want to be passionate. I want to have my emotions moved. I want to be enthralled by something. I want to be bewildered. That the criteria for as much isn't consistent with what an 11 or 14-year-old wants means that I'm pretty much destitute when it comes to the type of content that I can be impressed by. Episode 7 of Better Call Saul. It was that oasis that I've been looking for out in the desert of comic book superhero movies and bland, formulaic corporate pop music. From start to finish, one of the episodes that just keeps you enthralled, and is certainly a great addition to the resume of Vince Gilligan, adding to his stature. The show picks up momentum episode after episode, season after season. Like Breaking Bad, it gets better with age, it gets better with time, and it gets better as it reaches its conclusion. Let's open with Lalo in the sewers, and as soon as I saw him in the sewers, I knew, and I'm sure you did too, dear listener, I knew that he was scoping out the laundry. That Gilligan, the writers, the director, had set up that Lalo had gotten the information that he needed in order to track down what Gus had been working on, what the big reveal was with regard to his methamphetamine business. The way they had Lalo going through the sewers and then going to the truck stop to take the shower, take a quick cat nap, and then get back. The whole sequence was brilliant. I'm going to cut to Lalo calling Tito, calling his uncle, and letting him know he did it. He found the evidence that he needed in order to indict Gus with the cartel. To go back to Don Eladio and say, this guy isn't running an operation under your wing. This guy is going to create an operation that's going to not only compete with you, but might overtake you. Old Gus is going to get too big for his britches. The click in the background as he's making the call, and the frustration that he feels that he can't reach out to his uncle and give him this information. He's not going to have time to do everything that he needs to do and to give Tito the satisfaction that he had accomplished the goal. It fits perfectly, though, within the universe of the show, that Tito never discovers what Gus's ultimate plan was. Lalo knows, but he can't let Gus know that he knows. Therefore, he can't tell Tito on the phone that he knows. And by way of what we know that occurs in the universe of Breaking Bad, Tito never discovers what Lalo finds out. How Lalo meets his ultimate demise, who knows? But I'm enthusiastically waiting for it. They have built this up so well, there's no telling how it's going to play out. And that's one of the things that I love about the Breaking Bad universe, the Better Call Saul universe. You know how certain things are going to play out, but they create such tension, and the storytelling is so nuanced and sublime, you don't mind just being along for the ride. You don't mind that you know how it's going to end. You're just happy to be along for the ride in order to find out. So Tito, in the universe of the show, hearing that Lalo couldn't find what he was looking for, but that Lalo was going to execute plan A, which is just to kill Gus, that suits Tito fine. He's more than happy with Lalo taking that type of revenge rather than indicting Gus in front of the cartel. So the phone call, being complete subterfuge, it had to be as much. Tito had to come away ignorant and unaware so that Gus would be ignorant and unaware. And ignorant and unaware is what both Gus and Mike are. Now we can cut to the storyline with Jimmy and Kim and what their ultimate plan was and the way that it played out. I loved everything about it, but for the fact that the photos were switched. Perhaps I missed something. Perhaps I need to go back and rewatch the episode, but I don't think that there was an adequate explanation as to how Howard sees a set of photographs. He goes down to the meeting. The same photographs in the same envelope are of a different or depict a different scene than the ones that he had looked at not 20 minutes before. Is it plausible that the private detective went back in and exchanged those photographs? Certainly. I don't think it is plausible in the sense of reality that the guy would walk into the office, have a conversation with Howard, in such a tense and high-profile time. Note, when the private detective came into the office, it was somewhat awkward. Howard was caught somewhat unawares, and his secretary had to say, it's that important that in light of this mediation that you're about to have to decide this multi-million-dollar case, you need to step away and meet with this private detective. That private detective coming back in the office to exchange the photographs, the only thing I didn't like about the overall plot, the overall plan, and the way it was executed. Otherwise, it was brilliant. Down to the liquid being wiped onto the photographs that you note Kim and Jimmy don't touch, and that neither does the private detective when they are then presented to Howard. I am not a chemist, nor am I a doctor, a scientist. I'd like to know what they used to put on those photographs that would both dilate the pupils and increase the heart rate, that would make one instantly become flush in the face and the hands, that would make one sweat profusely, and then how things all fall apart. I thought the actors, particularly the actors in these scenes, did an excellent job selling the awkwardness of the situation and how the tables quickly turned so that a mediation where Howard and his partner had the leverage, were going in with a heavy hand, in less than 10 minutes come away with an offer that they had years ago that was going to decrease by $1 million a day unless they took it immediately. And as I finish this segment about episode 7 of Better Call Saul, I want to talk about the actor that plays Howard Hamlin. The Howard Hamlin character is an interesting and difficult character to play, and Patrick Fabian has done an excellent job, but never more so than the final scene of Howard Hamlin's character in the show. The scene where he comes in to Jimmy and Kim's apartment with the bottle of Macallan in a posture of defeat, admitting that they won, but just wanting to know why. What was the point of it all? What did you actually gain? Who are you two? What are you now together? As an aside, again, I thought that this whole scene reinforced the fact that Kim and Jimmy together are Saul Goodman in the universe of Breaking Bad. But here you have Howard exploring what this all was, what it was all about, what was the goal of it. And then he explains it, and I don't think that he's explaining it as much in the universe of the show as he's explaining it as a narrative to the viewer. They get off on it. As much as there may be some substance to whatever they think they're trying to accomplish, they get off on the actual process and the getting away with it. It was prefaced by the scene with Kim and her mother. It's been prefaced with all the scenes of Jimmy and the things that he's done and the things that he's gotten away with. There is a thrill to doing it. There is a thrill to getting away with it. And there are people who are going to be victims of it. And Howard, in this moment, as a victim, is giving voice to the victims. Why did you do this? What was the point besides just getting off on it? To destroy a man. It was, in my mind, the best scene that Patrick Fabian has done, has acted in his role as Howard Hamlin. It reminded me of Dean Norris in Breaking Bad when he realizes after he breaks into Jesse Pinkman's house and beats the living hell out of him that his career is over. I can remember that scene when he's sitting down with his wife on the bed, and it completely opened up the universe of that show to me. That's when I realized, oh, wait a minute. This is one of those shows where there isn't one storyline, there isn't one character that's going to be so much more featured than the others, that's going to outshine the others, where the actors, where the plot lines, they're going to be so much more in favor of one storyline or another. When you had someone in that position in the universe of the show, and the way Dean Norris carried it as Hank Schrader, and the weight of it, realizing that his entire career was over, that's when I knew Vince Gilligan was doing something special. That's when I knew this is more than just excellent writing. This is magic. This is magic coming together. You've got the directors, you've got the cast, you've got the writers, and you've got the type of organization, AMC, backing these folks. This is magic. Mind you, dear listener, that's how I felt as Patrick Fabian is going through what I'll call his monologue to Kim and Jimmy before that fateful knock on the door. And to be clear, Fabian doesn't let up as Lalo enters the room and he begins to talk himself through what is going on and realizing something very heavy is going on, seeing the fear in Kim and Jimmy and realizing that he's in a bad situation that he needs to get out of. It's only in that moment before he gets shot that he realizes the gravity of the situation that he's in. Being that this is a prequel and that you know basically what happens in the scope of the universe of Breaking Bad, you have an idea about how the characters are going to end up. If this was Patrick Fabian riding off into the sunset as Howard Hamlin, disgraced, leaving the law firm or leaving the state of New Mexico or just staying in that position, but being that guy in the background that has lost all of the luster in the legal community, that he's just basically waiting out his days with the millions of dollars that he's going to get in that settlement, just waiting out his days in a 4 or 5 office law firm after everyone has left his side. That would have made sense. You could have written that a number of ways. Howard leaves the law, he leaves the state of New Mexico, or he's just a shell of himself in a tiny law firm, a divorcee, he's out of the picture. Seeing him get shot, it was a jaw dropper. I did not expect it. I don't think anybody expected it. And the way it was executed was flawless. Now, as excited as I am, as passionate as I am going through this piece, the kick in the balls, not 30 seconds later, was, hey, Better Call Saul will be back July 11th. July 11th. Close to 6 weeks we have to wait for the next episode of Better Call Saul. It appears that AMC and Vince Gilligan do remember one of the quintessential rules of vaudeville, of show business 150 years ago. Leave them wanting more. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.